support email address for WestGrid, and this is your one-stop shop for all support. That's support@westgrid.ca. And this is a place where you can ask any question. No question is too big or too small. You get questions on there for everything from account problems, help, I can't log in, my IP address is getting denied or something like that, to parallelization questions and code optimization advice, as well as here's what I'm trying to do, can you get me started, as somebody else tried to do something like that. So it's really, the people there are there to help you. Don't be shy about asking questions, and no question is too big or too small. If it's not the right place to ask, we'll know where to send you. So it's always a good first choice. And like I said, these are the most important two things. You don't write down anything else. These are two things you should remember. So the next thing I'll talk about is choosing a system, and this is pretty important. Depending on the type of project, the type of computing you need to do, WestGrid has a number of different systems with quite a lot of variety in the architecture. There's a number of general purpose machines which are good for serial jobs, and then we have some clusters that are more appropriately used for parallel work. And then we've got some shared computing systems, and then we've got, shared memory computing systems, and then we've got some systems that are mostly for storage. So the place to find information on those systems, the current systems, https www.westgrid.ca/support/systems. It's linked off the main page. Some systems will obviously be better suited to your project than others. And again, at support@westgrid.ca, if you're not clear on what system is best suited, that's a good place to ask. As well, there's some software that we have available at WestGrid that's only available on certain systems for licensing or technical reasons. For example, MATLAB is only available at select systems, so if you depend on MATLAB, you'll need to choose accordingly. The software is listed on another page, which I unfortunately haven't linked there, but it's easy to find off the main WestGrid site. So here's a few example systems. I'll start off with the two that I administer. Hermes is a general purpose serial processing batch system. It's got 2,112 cores with 25 gigabytes of memory per node. It's got either dual GigE or a 10-to-1 blocking InfiniBand. So it's not really geared for, it doesn't have a super fast interconnect for parallel jobs, and that's why it's mostly for serial jobs. It's heavily used by Atlas and also other users. It's got 1.2 petabytes of storage attached. The next system on that list is Nestor, which is another cluster I administer. That's sort of the sister cluster to Hermes. It's parallel for parallel jobs because it's got a high-speed InfiniBand QDR interconnect. The nodes are very similar, but because of the interconnect, and also because we build the images differently, it's got different software on them. This is really geared for parallel jobs. And it shares the same storage with Hermes, so it's got 1.2 petabytes as well. Hungabee is a newer system at the University of Alberta that's got 2,048 cores, and it's a shared memory system. So instead of relying so much on the fast interconnect, all the nodes share memory. I don't know tons about that system, but the place to find out more information is westgrid.ca, or if you're interested in using it, talk to support@westgrid.ca. It's got 405 terabytes of storage online. And then there's Silo at the end is the main storage site for WestGrid. So it's basically geared around data as a data repository. And on that, there are a number of different systems. This is just a couple of them. We've got systems all over Western Canada, and they're all described on that website. So for those of you who've never used a batch cluster, I'll give you a quick overview of the architecture here. I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but right at the left we've got your workstation. So that represents your workstation with a big chunky CRT monitor from 1995. That's either in your office or at home or wherever you're connecting from. So that's your machine. And using whatever software you use to connect, you then connect to these login nodes over here. And so these are, when you say connect to hermes.westgrid.ca, you'll wind up on one of these systems here. You don't actually run your heavy computing there. Your HPC doesn't happen on these nodes. What you do is you set up a job, like you'll log in here and you'll do some editing of your source code, you'll set up your data, and you'll get things ready, and then you'll create what's called a job script, and then you'll submit that to this next system labeled a scheduler. But that could be a number of machines that basically manage the workload. And from the scheduler, when you submit your job to the scheduler, the scheduler figures out where it should go, what resources are available, who else is waiting for those resources, and such. And then it goes on to and then when it's ready, it gets dispatched onto whatever worker nodes are within the cluster. So that's Nestor at the far right there, for example. So if I was going to submit a job, I'd log in from my workstation onto the login node, set up my job script, submit a job, it would go to the scheduler, and the scheduler, when it figured out when best to put my job, would then dispatch it to Nestor, and then it would run, and I get the results back, and I'll go through that.
Excuse me, I missed. Can we ask a question on the way or later?
We'll have questions at the end. There'll be time for that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so for connecting to WestGrid systems, all WestGrid systems are available via SSH, Secure Shell. That's the main way of getting in. If you're using a Linux or a Mac system, you have SSH already available for you. For Windows, there's a free download called PuTTY. You can just search for that on the internet, or it's referenced from the WestGrid webpage. And it works really well, and that'll get you in. So you use that to connect to whichever WestGrid system you want. And that's for interactive logins. If you need to do file transfers, then that's done through Secure Copy or Secure FTP, which use the SSH protocol. And they use different clients for that, though. So on Linux or Mac, it's again included. I'm not sure about Mac, but on Linux, it's SCP and SFTP. On Windows, you would download a program called WinSCP, which is free, or FileZilla, which is also free. And those will both let you copy data into a WestGrid system and copy it back off the system. And they're very easy to use. They work just like they have nice GUIs, and they work just like you'd expect. There are also grid tools available for transferring data between WestGrid systems. I'm not going to go into those today. I just want to let you know that they're there and they're documented on the WestGrid site. So down in that blue box at the bottom there, everything you need to know as a WestGrid new user is under the Quick Start Guides. There's a Quick Start Guide just for new users. It's got everything you need to know that's in this presentation and to get you started. So once you get logged in, here are some, sorry, I'm just going to really quickly run through logging into Hermes. So please bear with me, I hope this works. So here's PuTTY, I downloaded it from the net this morning. I verified it was a proper copy, but there you go. So I type in the address, connecting to port 22, I just go with the defaults all the way across, log in. I accept the signature because I recognize it. I give my WestGrid username, and then it asks me for my password, so I type that in. Here I am. I'm now on the Hermes system. And this is the interactive node from which I'd submit a job or edit my job files. So for example, here I've got my job script all set up, ready to go. We're going to go through that in a minute. And if you're at all familiar, like if you're familiar with DOS or Linux, you're not going to have any problems. If you're not, And then here's some of the commands that you'll need to know. And these are pretty easy to get used to. I'm just going to go over these really quickly. I'm not expecting you to remember this, but I just want to plant the seed in your head if you've never seen these before. So to list directory contents, the basic command, the basic command is ls. And there's a couple of options. You can do ls-a for hidden files and ls-l for a long listing that tells you the dates, the size, and such. To create or remove a directory, it's mkdir for make dir or rmdir for remove dir. To change to a directory, cd space directory. And to change to the parent or to back out of that directory, it's cd ... To copy file, cp, source file name, target file name. To copy a directory, you add a -r, which means recursive, and that'll copy a whole directory tree. To move a file or a directory, it's the mv command. To rename a file or directory, it's the same because you're basically, the way Linux handles files is basically what you're doing in both these cases. You're just changing the name. To remove file, it's rm. And an important one, to view a file, it would be less, which gives you a paged view, or cat, which just dumps out the contents of the file. So once you've got your output back, you might do cat output file and see what the results are on your screen. I didn't include a discussion on editors because there are a number there. You might be, and it really depends on what you're used to. Some of you might decide to edit everything on your workstation and then use SCP or SFTP to transfer it up. Others are maybe comfortable with such as Vim or Emacs, both of which are available on all our systems. If you are a bit of a power user or you've just got the software, you can always SSH in with X11 forwarding, and you can run Nedit or Xemacs on a lot of our systems as well. To see what's available, you can check the software page to see what editors you can use. Okay, so I want to go through the basics of job basics. So as I mentioned, login nodes are for data management, editing and compiling your source code, and job management. And it's also okay to run a quick test. What we don't want to see is, because everybody shares the interactive nodes a lot of the time, right? So we don't want to see people running their jobs on the interactive nodes. And people do that occasionally, usually because they don't quite understand the architecture of a batch system. So if you do understand the architecture of a batch system, sorry, please just bear with me. If we do see people running code, we'll sometimes let it go. We'll usually let it go for a little while because it's reasonable on most of our systems to run short tests to make sure that your code is going to do what you want it to do. But we're talking short and also only using one core. If we see people running 4 cores for 3 hours, we will ask them to shut it down because that's not how the batch system works. The real work is done on the worker nodes. So what you do is you get your code ready to go, and then you set up a job and you submit a request to the batch system saying, okay, I've got this code, I need these sorts of resources. Can you please set it up so that this job will run on appropriate resources so I can get my results. And then, as I mentioned, the scheduler decides where that should be and dispatches that. Now, how the scheduler decides when and where your job should run depends on a number of factors. One of the factors is obviously what's available. If our systems, we try to keep them busy all of the time, because if they're not busy, then we're not doing science for the people who need it. So in general, when you arrive at a system and you've got something you want to submit, it's going to have to wait for a while because other things are already running, and that's completely normal. So when the scheduler receives your job request and tries to decide when and where it should go, it looks at what's running there right now to see what resources are available. There might be no nodes available, there might be 5 cores, there might be 100 cores. And then it also looks at the priority of your job. Your priority of your job might depend on a number of factors, but the most important one is called FairShare. FairShare is something that's implemented across WestGrid, and it's based on your past usage and as well what your share has been determined to be. For most users, your share on a given system will be the default, which basically is all of the cores over the year divided by the number of users wanting that, who might want access to that. And then as well, every year there's a rack allocation process, which I believe Lindsay has spoken about at the last one. And that allocation process allocates a certain number of core years on given systems to particular projects. That basically gives them a larger share. That doesn't mean everybody else is blocked out. It does mean that in some cases, they will get a higher priority when they submit a job because they get a larger. Now, but it also depends on what their usage is. So, or what your usage is and what their usage is. So everybody's basically given an allocation, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit confusing, but everybody is basically winds up with an allocation. Most of us will have a default allocation. Some of us have a project-based rack allocation, which will be larger than the default. So if you are, the scheduler records your usage over, in most cases on most systems, a 2-week period. If you've used more than your share over that period, you will have a lower priority than people who have not used their allocation over that period. So even if you're somebody who's just coming in with absolutely no allocation at all, you're gonna have a really small share. But if the person in front of you, or the only other jobs on the system are jobs belonging to people who've been running flat out and have used up their allocation, they still get to run, but they'll be prioritized behind you. And that's basically how FairShare works. The idea is with FairShare is that we set targets for everybody to reach, and people who reach that target have to wait for people who haven't reached that target yet. And that's why it's called FairShare. Even though some shares are bigger than others, we really try to manage this in such a way that everybody gets a chance. Okay, so let's go through the job basics. There's a lot of flexibility in how you define a job, but down to the basics, it's basically how much memory you're going to need, how many cores are you going to need, how long do you want the job to run. And it's really important to try to get these right, because if your job exceeds these resources, your job may be terminated before completion. Especially on the last one, wall time, you can't use more wall time than you've asked for. And so a lot of people, rule of thumb, when you're getting started, estimate what you think it'll take and multiply it by 3. As you get more experience, you'll be able to come up with maybe better estimates, but it's definitely a good time to pad that time out. Scheduling decisions are made based on these parameters, and so it's important that you get them as accurate as you can, because if the reason a job might be terminated if it violates what's requested, if it uses more than what's requested, is so that the scheduler can schedule the jobs most efficiently to make the most effective use of the cluster. We don't want to terminate jobs that run over, but we do want the jobs that are behaving well to get a chance to go. So if a job is using up all the cores on a given node when it's only declared that it's going to use 1, and then all the other jobs running on the node don't get work, well, that person can't do their analysis. So that's why these policies are in place. So we'll help you with that if you're having trouble. So here are the basic commands to submitting a job, and in a moment I'll go through a test job with you. But these are the basic commands that you need to know. All of these except for show queue, will have a man page associated. So you can do, for example, man q sub to learn how it works and go on from there. As well, they're all documented on the WestGrid site. So to submit a job, you use q sub and then you give it the name of the script. There's other parameters you can include as well, but I won't go into those. You can explore those later. To check the status of the job, qstat, and then you give it the job ID, which I'll show you in a minute. To check the scheduling, see where your job is in, you can use show queue and then look for your job ID or your username. Show queue doesn't have a man page. You can do show queue -- help to get the command syntax for that, as well documented on the website. To delete a job, you can do qdel the job ID. If you're wondering when your job will start, you can try show start and then the job ID and then how to get help. And again, everything you need to know is on the new user's quick start guide. So here's a really basic PBS job script, sorry. As you can see, it's basically a shell script with a few directives to the schedule, to the resource manager. Those are hash PBS whatever, because back in the day it used to be the portable batch system, and so all of these directives are prefixed PBS. So the first PBS line says -l prox equals 1. It's requesting one processor. All these are documented within the man pages, but I'm just going through them really quickly. The next line says I want to combine the job output, the O, and the error, the E files. And then in the next one, the next directive says where the output is, where I want it to go. So we'll look at that in a minute when I actually run this. And then the rest of it is just what I want to do, what I want the job to do. So it's really silly. It's just saying, spit out the date, say hello world, I'm having a wonderful time on, and then it prints out the host name of the host that it's actually running on, and then signs off with the user ID. So I've got that right here. Hopefully you can all see this. If I show you my job script, it's exactly like it was on the slide. So I just edit this using Vim, and then I can take that job file, which is hello.pbs, and use qsub to submit it to the cluster. And then what I get back is a job ID, which I can use. Okay, that's the job ID there. So the whole thing is the job ID, but you can use just the numerical part. So we'll see this in a minute, but if I wanted to, I could check on the status of my... Sorry, I don't use Windows very often. I can check on the status, as you're seeing there, qstat, then the job ID. Either the short form, just the number, or the long form will work. And it's telling me that this job is, right now it's queued. That's the queue at the far right there. It's going to the Hermes queue, and the rest is just information. So I can also run show queue. Whoa, there's a lot of jobs there. Where is my job? Run show queue, run it through less. I can look for my name. Oh, it's right at the end. I don't have a lot of priority. That's okay. When it'll run eventually. I don't need to sit here and watch it, and then I'll get the output. Fortunately, I already ran. Oh, looks like it finished already. Great. Awesome. The system works. Okay, so here we are. This is the output file. I just dumped it out. Now the most important stuff is the stuff in the middle. All the WestGrid systems should give you this information here. This is what the job script was supposed to produce. What's wrapped around it is the prologue and the epilogue. Our system provides this. Maybe not all WestGrid systems will. It just gives you information about the job that ran. So it's telling me that it ran my name, Leske, my group, Leske. It ran on Hermes 195, and the date that it started and the date that it ended. Excuse me, what resources it consumed and that kind of stuff. That information is always available for you. Whether it shows up in your output file depends on the system. And that's basically how you run a job. It's very simple. So again, you use qsub to submit the job to the cluster, and you get an ID back, and you can use that ID to check the status of the job. If you check the status and you get unknown job ID back, then either you've got a typo or the job is already completed, so then you can have a look at the output. So again, just going through the output, it did produce what I wanted it to do. If it doesn't, then you might have a problem. You might have a problem in your job script. Maybe your program isn't doing quite what you want it to do, or there's some other condition. So the output should give you some clues as to that. And if you're still having trouble figuring out, you can always contact us. So what I suggest is, again, everything you need to get started is at that new user's quick start guide. I'd suggest you run a couple of goofy little test jobs, just trying out the different commands. Don't try to do hard science right off the bat. Just do a hello world and just get familiar with the tools and learn how learn how they work to do what you need to do. If you have problems, like I said, the job output usually provides the best clues. If not, please go ahead and email us at support@westgrid.ca. But if you do email us about a job problem, please remember to include the name of the system you're using and the job ID if you can, and your WestGrid user ID. Quite often we get emails from people saying my job didn't work. And then we have to go back to them and say where. And also sometimes the email address people send in doesn't match their WestGrid user ID. So if you give us that information, it's a lot easier for us to track down what happened. And also if it's a more complex issue, maybe it's performance. Maybe your job ran, but it didn't give you the results you expected, or the performance was not what you expected. Then it's helpful if you can provide more details and context. That'll really help us solve your problem. And that's basically all I'm going to talk about today. So let's just recap here. So to use the systems effectively, the really important thing you need to know is where to get help and information. And again, that is support@westgrid.ca or the WestGrid website, www.westgrid.ca. The next thing you need to do are figure out which systems are best suited to your project and the type of computing you're doing. The information on the systems is available on the WestGrid website, and if you need further help, or with some of our systems you need to request access, so if you need to do that, support@westgrid.ca. How to log on to those systems we went over, I hope it's fairly clear. If you've got any problems, you know where to go. The basic Linux commands, they're documented on the website, are in 70 billion other places on the internet. And then the lesson we went over was how to define and submit batch jobs. And I hope that was fairly clear because I did go through it pretty quickly. So I'm not going to reread that slide because I just said it all, but don't be shy. We're here at WestGrid to support your research, your science, your work, and we want to help. Like I said before, and I can't reiterate this enough, there's no question too small, there's no question too big. If you can't log in, let us help you. If your program is running okay, but you need more performance, let us help you. Just send in an email to support@westgrid.ca. Tell us as much as you can about the problem. We're there to help. We've got a lot of people who watch that mailing address or that mailing list who are there to help and who are very qualified, very smart, and very capable. And that concludes my presentation. Thanks for coming. I hope it was helpful. I hope it gets you started. And I believe we now open to questions.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so if there are any questions, please shoot them my way. How is this usually?
Okay, we have a question coming from the U of A.
Okay, go ahead.
The username and password on the system, is that the same as the username and password for the Compute Canada website, or is it totally separate?
It's separate. Have you applied for a WestGrid account?
Yes.
Okay, the WestGrid. Okay, then that will be the same password as your WestGrid username and password. It's the same across all of the systems.
No.
And when
Canada, it's.
Are they the same?
No, they are not.
Okay.
Sorry,
say that again.
It's not working for me. So I went to check on the website, and there is a change password, but I'm assuming that's just changing the password for the website, not on the WestGrid systems.
Sorry, just one sec. Can you take this one?
Okay. So basically, your Compute Canada account. So when you went to ccdb.computecanada.ca, so that's completely a different, like, your username is your email address and password, whatever you like. But when you log into that page and then you went and you apply for a consortium account under WestGrid, so that's completely different. So it's a username that usually Compute Canada will suggest one for you, or the one you choose when you applied. And then that one, when you apply for WestGrid, you will specify the password, and that's the password you should use to log into our systems. And it will take, a few hours before that, like your account propagates to all the systems. So it will take depend on the systems. But for example, on Nestor and Hermes, we update our accounting system locally every 5 hours or something like that. So we have it 4 times a day. So when you apply, you have to wait a little bit before you check your account.
All right, and if they've lost the password, how do they get it back? Like, how do they get a new password if they've lost their WestGrid password?
So there is, there is a bunch of questions that we ask on the WestGrid page when they apply for account on WestGrid, we ask a bunch of questions, 3 questions, I believe, and then they need to provide those questions for us for security reasons when they try to log into the portal that WestGrid.ca. The other way to do it is to call, for example, they are in, I believe, in University of Alberta or ECFU or whatever, they can call the admin there. They can just check the WestGrid.ca and they know who to call for changing the password. Is that fair enough?
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
Okay, do we have other questions? I see another one at the U of A.
I wanted to ask if we need to install libraries on the system in order to run our code. Is it fine if we install those libraries on the login nodes? Or is the... Sorry.
In general, it's fine if you install your own libraries on the login nodes. It's always a good idea to say, hey, I need check to see if the software is available, first of all. Second, it might be a good idea to send a thing to support@westgrid.ca saying, I need these libraries. I'm happy to install them myself, but there might be other users who need them. So the administrator on that system might think it's a better idea to install them where everybody can get at them. But installing stuff on your home directory is fine. And on most systems, for it to be usable on the worker node, that will be fine as well. So yeah, that should be fine. If you have any problems, contact support. But again, sorry, I was just going to say, if you do need software, it's a good idea to request it because we can help with that. And what was your follow-up question?
So if supposing we have to install a library and compile our code against that library, is it fine to just run that program once on the login node to check if it's running before submitting it to PBS?
Yes, that is absolutely fine. The login nodes are geared for that kind of thing. And that is where we expect you to compile your code. We don't really expect you to submit a job just to compile your code. So that is fine. Short test jobs are fine. Like I mentioned, we just don't want to see you squeezing out other users by running actual HPC on the login nodes for an extended period of time. But yes, test jobs, making sure things compile and are doing what you expected them to do, running a test off a small data set, a small test data set, absolutely appropriate. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hello. Excuse me. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So I have a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
Is there? I couldn't find any command on your website to kill a job. There is, for example, qdel to delete a queued job, but not to kill a running job.
Okay. Yeah, I referenced that, I think, really briefly on one of these slides. qdel will, there it is, delete a job, qdel. That will remove a job that's queued. It will also kill a job that's running and remove it from the queue. So if you do qdel job ID on a running job, it will send a signal to the worker node or worker node saying, okay, this job needs to be terminated, go ahead and kill it, and that'll clean up all the resources and your job will be killed.
Okay. Okay.
So QDEL works for running or queued or jobs in a batch state or whatever. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I saw another hand up at U of A.
Yeah. So my question is about how to put our data. So from the login node, I can if I put my data to the login node, and when I submit the job to the scheduler, would that my data be available for the worker nodes, or do I need to do something separate to make sure my data is available in the worker nodes, for example?
No, in general, your home file system. Yeah, I didn't take the time to go into this, but on each system, on most WestGrid systems, there's the home file system, and then there's a global Scratch file system. Both of those are available to all of the worker nodes as well. The home file system is where you log into, so that would be, for me, it would be /home/dleske. As soon as I log in, plunk, that's where I am. The Scratch file system is, they're all described on the system pages, on the individual system pages, but it's most often /global/scratch/your user ID. And either of those file systems are a good place to store your data, and they will be available on the worker node. So if your data is available in your home directory, it's going to be available to your job when it's running on the worker node. When you're submitting your job and you're setting up these job scripts, you want to be careful about using file names that are appropriate, so that your job script will find those files. But say if you had home, you're within your home directory, if you had a directory data, then you just reference your home directory and then /data and then the file name, and it'll be able to find it. The difference between. Go ahead.
So if my job test is passed in my login node, then it will be running in the worker node. Correct?
Yeah. The only difference though is when you run a job on the login node, it won't be wrapped up in the job script. So you might have to do a little bit of debugging there just on getting your job script to work. But once you do it a couple of times, you'll have the hang of it, no problem. And I think it'll be straightforward for you.
Okay, thank you.
Now I think I'll take one more question, and then the rest of the questions are usually for the local support people you've got there in your sites. So I'll take one more question. Go ahead, U of A.
Excuse me. When I log into the WestGrid, I type the letter, but it takes a long time for the letter come out. I don't know whether the problem caused by the WestGrid or by my computer.
Okay, there might be a couple of problems. One of the issues that we sometimes have is for security reasons, WestGrid systems need to be able to reverse resolve your DNS. So if you're connected to some ISP that doesn't put the IP address that they give you in a DNS, you'll get denied. There's help for that on the WestGrid website. It talks about how you can test whether that's the case. If not, which WestGrid site are you trying to connect to?
Jasper.
Okay. Well, let me just show you something really quick here. So this is on the WestGrid site. You see the first thing I went to see if Jasper is available. It's right up here with the green light. So that should be fine. So I would suggest at this point you submit something to support at westgrid.ca. We check your IP, we make sure that it's reverse DNSing correctly, and then we see what else we can find about why you're not able to log in.
Oh yeah, I can log in, but when I type letter in the terminal, but the letters come out very late. It needs seconds for the terminal to respond, and what I typed in.
Oh, okay. So you're just having a really slow response time on
Yeah.
Jasper's? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I don't know of any particular issue right now. I'm not sure if it has to do with your particular network connection or if there's something else. I'll just try really quick myself to see. Yeah, sorry, I don't know. I'm able to get on pretty quickly here. I'd suggest sending in a support request to support@westgrid.ca and somebody will have a look.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. At each site, you should have local support people who are able to help you, and we'll continue the discussion locally. Thank you.